Hi guys, today we're going to work on finding out what percent of one number another number is. Take a look. 7 is what percent of 10? Or what percent of 10 is 7? Is another way you could say it. What I hear is that I want to know what part or how much of 10 I have if I have 7 things. We're actually just talking about a fraction here. 7 out of 10 things. But I'm not just asking you to write it as a fraction. Okay, I have 7/10, but what percent is that? Something you should remember is that percent is always out of 100. So this is like saying, what percent do I have is what part of 100 do I have? There are a couple ways you could do this. One way, which is kind of fun, is to look for a pattern between numbers. I can see I don't know what I'm trying to get from 7 to, but I can see I'm trying to get from 10 to 100. And I know that I can multiply 10 times 10 to get to 100. 10 times 10 is 100, which means this whole thing is 10 times greater than this one, which means up on top I can multiply 7 times 10, and 7 times 10 is 70. So if 7/10 is the exact same thing as 70 out of 100, and I know that percent is always out of 100, then that means it is 70%. Crazy. Let's take a look at another way you could do this. I know I'm dealing with 7/10 and I want to turn it into a percent. I want to know what percent of 10 is 7. Another way I could do this is I could also turn it into a decimal first by dividing top in, bottom out. I can't count by tens to get to 7, so I'm going to put up a 0, grab my decimal and bring it up, grab another 0. I can count by 10 7 times to get to 70. So I know that 7/10 is the same thing as 7/10, or 0.7. But I didn't ask you what decimal value it was. I said, what percent is it? What you should remember from before is that to turn a decimal into a percent, you can grab out your decimal and scoop it 2 times to the right. This represents multiplying by 100, or by our percent. So if I move my decimal here, then I get 70. So 7/10 is equal to 7/10, or 0.7, is equal to 70%. What percent of 50 is 45? What percent of 50 is 45? Well, the whole I'm dealing with here is 50, so I'm going to write that as the denominator of my fraction. The part I'm talking about is 45, so I'm asking, how can I go from 50 to 100? Because percent is always out of 100. Well, same thing. I can look for a pattern, or I can turn this into a decimal, then turn it into a percent. Let's look for a pattern first. To get from 50 to 100, I could multiply by 2, because 50 times 2 is 100. So I can do the same thing on top. 45 times 2 is 90. Percent is always out of 100, so that means that 45 out of 50 is 90%. 90% of 50 is 45. In case you hate that way, let me show you that other way too. So if I want to know what percent of 50 is 45, then I can set this up as a fraction. 45 out of 50, turn it into a decimal, then turn it into a percent. Top in, bottom out. So I'm going to ask myself, can I count by 50 to get to 4? I can't, so I'll put up a 0. Can I count by 50 to get to 45? No. 0. I'm out of numbers, so I need a decimal. And now I can add another 0. How many times can I count by 50 to get to 450? And that's 9. So I just figured out that 45/50ths is equal to 9/10, but I didn't want it as a decimal, I wanted it as a percent. So I need to take 9/10 and move my decimal 2 times to the right. When I fill in my 0 and drop it off, I get 90%. Either way you do it, you get 90%.